Gentlemen, on behalf of REMO, I'd just like to thank you guys for taking the time this morning to come in here. Some of our original initial pre-hospital caregivers from the region here, the first few classes ever given, students of Dr. Wesney. I thank you to come in, and thank you for coming in and taking your time just to share a little bit. Pay a little tribute to the doctor. Perhaps you could introduce yourselves.
He kept saying to the receptionist, so is he ready to see me yet? Well, he's busy. So finally he said, the heck with it. He got up, walked in right past the receptionist, opened up the door and said, I'm talking to you now, and he pounded on this table. And he said, this is what we're gonna do, you know? And if you don't like it, we won't bring you any
pilot program for intubation, and we did the very first intubations in the region. And then, of course, we got everybody trained up to date, and everybody started doing intubation.
Got started, so he said, that's what I want. I want them to be able to do what paramedics can do. So he got the state to let him teach a paramedic course, and he made the whole thing up.
He literally taught it himself.
Yeah.
He was looking for money constantly because he understood all the infrastructure that it took to put this together. He was a champion, and the word pioneer definitely belongs when describing how
30 years ago, he was not a young man when he was doing all the stuff that he was doing. And if you look at, that's what I was saying to these guys, if you look at the typical physician involved in REMO today, it's a relatively
big in our region. He was a relatively new attending.
Yes, he
At
was.
that point.
Yep.
Yes, he was. You're absolutely right.
He just has stuck with it longer than most. Most of them smart enough to get the hell away from us.
The young guys do it.
Took the bull by the horn and pointed us in the right direction and was relentless with the health department and making sure our region was heard and pretty much taken care of.
We didn't have the stretcher made. The door opens and here comes Wes, and he's in the doctor's face and he's in the nurse's face, and we're slowly trying to sneak out of the emergency room before all four of us got arrested.
Well, it all evolved around Wes, their doc, actually riding an ambulance in New York Hospital. He got accepted in New York Hospital, where he met his wife, and they both eventually got married and came back to this area because her mother owned Bellevue Maternity Hospital, and then they got involved there. Well, he started his own practice with him and Dr. Leary. I don't know whether
Leary was the
you
original
guys
partner.
remember
Leary, I did my first signal with Leary.
Yeah.
Leary was.
Just pick him up and get
That's
here.
right, that's right.
Pick him up and get here, no matter what it was. So he was used to, so he started riding when he was in college with New York Medical. They had their own ambulance. And he said they were really actually ambulance drivers. They were nothing else. As a matter of fact, the guy that he rode with would scare him to death because the guy always had a little bottle of 4 Roses. And the first thing he'd do as soon as they got a call, he'd drink the 4 Roses. And he said he was so nervous. As soon as he drank the 4 Roses, he went flying along, and he didn't care who was in front of him.
Oh, my God.
You know, he had a siren, no lights, and he swung by everybody and got there as quickly as he could and got the patient back to New York Med.
That was back in the days when they
Yeah.
had interns on the ambulance.
Yeah, they had he had a black bag, but there was nothing in it. So he'd steal stuff out of the hospital to fill the black bag, and he finally ended up with IV fluids and everything else, medications and everything else he thought he would need in order to take care of the patient if they ever got to the hospital alive. Yeah. So it was really an interesting process. Then he went from there when he got involved here, and he and Leary started Latham Medical Group. Wes all the time was saying, you can't have ambulance drivers. You have to have more than ambulance drivers going out and picking up patients. So he contacted, the only place he knew to contact, he contacted the Red Cross. And the Red Cross said, oh, you can teach them first aid. And that lasted,
Right.
one course. And he said, no, this isn't going to work. This is worse than ambulance drivers. They can't do as much as.
They were the same folks that said you can't teach CPR, right?
Yep, definitely. And then the second thing, he started teaching EMT courses. They made him an EMT instructor just to, get him off their backs, the state health department. And so he became an EMT instructor, and he goes, well, this is all right, but this isn't gonna make it either. I gotta have people that are paramedics, because when he was in the military, he was a corpsman, which was basically a medic.
Yeah, they
With
did
the
a lot of stuff.
Marines. Yeah, with the Marines he was. And so that's where he got started. So he said, that's what I want. I want him to be able to do what paramedics can do. So he got the state to let him teach a paramedic course, and he made the whole thing
He
out.
literally taught it himself.
Yeah, because if you think about it, he wasn't a legend. He was the father of EMS. There's no question about it, because he made it all up.
There was no curriculum, there was no standard
No,
model.
nothing.
Well, they were working on it. George Johnson and the guys down in the state health department were working on that advanced EMT program. They were, and I think some of the what they put together in '74 was some of the original stuff. Probably the only place it was being done was here.
Syracuse.
Syracuse with that Heart Association program, and the
Long
Speculator program
Right.
with
Malady.
what was their name?
Yeah.
Phil and
Phil
Joe.
Phil Malady,
And Long Island.
Long Island with the doctor, that was at Costas Lambrou, no, I'm not
Yes.
sure. Yeah, Dr. Costas Lambrou, and the Long Island, Nassau County Sheriff's Department program.
Yeah.
And they all were evolving about that same time.
Skenevus.
70, and then of course the famous Tonawanda, outside of Buffalo, the Tonawanda Police Department paramedic program, which was, they all came about they came around from that 73, 74, 75 era, and Doc was pushing it here, and as a result of it, I think some of the curriculum was developed around that. I mean, we were teaching the original, it was a module approach. There was module 1 was the respiratory module. There was module 2, which was the advanced EMT 2, and I can't remember what the hell that was.
The two, one was EOA, one was IV.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one was EOA, one was
EOA.
IV, and then there was another module, which was, and eventually you got to AEMT 4. We kind of blended those
Yeah, the
two
AEM
modules together between 74 and 75.
The AEMT3 was critical care.
Critical care, yes.
Yeah, which was a very watered down paramedic program.
Yeah, and then AEMT 4 was what became the critical care program when the EMT paramedic program came about in 79, 80, when New York State got around it. to
We
do
were
that.
putting it together when Jim was in the first class that we tried to run the AEMT 4 class, paramedic program. And we got most of it in there, except for the internship that came on a little later.
But the interesting thing is that because Doc was, and Earl can help me with this, because Doc was from the town of Colony, and his business was in the town of Colony, he practiced in the town of Colony, he was actively involved in the mutual aid town of Colony ambulance program, the medical program.
Medical,
So
yes.
all of this evolved between Doc and medical, and he was kind of the driving force to help to keep medical together. Plus George Johnson was the medical director at the time in 74, I think. Medical. So it really was Doc's driving force to keep together that medical program, and to and Earl's right, he started teaching EMT courses. I didn't get involved till 73 when I came into the volunteer fire service, and became an EMT in 73, 74, and then we did Doc's program. It started it in the fall of 74, right? And then he did another one in the spring of 75, and then blended it all together and put us in the street in July of 75. Because George had gotten the grant for the radios, and we got the Life Pack 5s, and we got the VHF radios, the state system, the HERE system, put in every ambulance.
And then it expanded, the radio system expanded into REMAC, which was being run by the town of Colony, which was where everybody called in for a signal. It was called a Signal 600, as you know.
Originally CMAC with a C, wasn't it, before?
It was originally CMAC, yeah. That was when it was the town of Colony system. When he wrote the protocols, Doc Westney, and when he came up with this idea, how to get this communication system into effect and everything, it was REMAC. I mean, it was CMAC, yeah. So we just changed it to REMAC, and everything worked out fine.
Well, that's because it became REMAC when, did it become REMAC after the state grants, when the regional emergency medical, when the 5-county region, when our 5-county organization was established?
Six
Yeah,
county.
probably.
6 county, I meant to say, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
When the federal grants.
I don't remember him doing, remember, it wasn't EMT. I don't mean to correct you, it was not EMT, it was MET, Medical
Oh, you're
Emergency
an MET,
Technician.
okay, you're really a...
Medical Emergency Technician. And that's what he started teaching. And that was you had to have the Red Cross White Book, which was the Advanced First Aid, and
Yep.
then you could take this MET program, and New York State blended it together into the Medical Emergency Technician.
Yeah, and that's what the patch said,
Me too,
MET.
yes, I remember
Yeah.
George DePaula had...
And that's
yeah.
what Doc started teaching originally. One of the very first ones, I only know this historically because I wasn't here, was in 69 or 70 at Verdoy, was one of the
Yeah.
early ones. And there was one taught at the American Red Cross at one time.
Yes.
I remember he did some modular stuff, because I remember before I went to college in central New York, I took a lecture from him. He was teaching individual modules, and I still have an image in my head of him teaching the childbirth and calling somebody up from the class who had a turtleneck on, so he could put their head in there to show how the delivery would go. Right, and how dynamic. I mean, he was a great instructor, and it really,
very good instructor.
it had the whole class engaged and focused on it. It was a great, he was a great talk. I still remember it.
That's what I was saying, is I remember Westney coming in at the end of I don't know, it was probably more than a week, but we were learning cardiology, and one of the instructors was probably, a genius, but was very much a monotone and was probably teaching way, way, way over our heads, with the understanding of 3 beat EKGs and when to defibrillate.
Right.
And I can remember Wes coming in and in probably 90 minutes taking us from the, oh my God, we're never going to understand this, to, oh, this is what we've been talking about, for a couple of weeks here. And it was, that's what was his ability to, I think, practically instill in the paramedic, what he needed to know, how he needed to act, and how it was going to all come together. And that was, virtually amazing. I mean, you guys probably are even before I was, but if you think about what we were doing and when we were doing it, it's almost amazing that it occurred. And I gave an example
yes.
when I sent the email out to these guys when Doc passed, is if you think about just IVs, which are so commonplace today, when we were learning that, it wasn't even an RN that typically did an IV. It was an RN with special training.
Yep.
And, we were walking
yes.
into these hospitals.
I can still remember pulling up, and when Albany Med's ER was down in the ramp, taking somebody out, and the nurse goes, "Who started that IV?"
And again, it's just, it amazes me that Doc accomplished, the cell job.
Yeah, that must have been.
I can't imagine the discussions that he was involved in, let alone battles, to convince a hospital that, we were going to send these, volunteers, these firemen, police officers, whatever, through, and we're going to teach them to do all this stuff in the field.
Well, I remember the head nurse, the nun at St. Peter's, who said, they're going to come in here with those dirty boots on and get my hospital all dirty with their dirty boots, that we'll never do that. And then I can remember going, when Wes finally got Albany Med started, that was a battle. You know, he made an appointment to get down there and talk to the vice president at Albany Med to talk about people doing IVs in the field and going in there and doing their training, and then bringing patients in where the IV was already started. And he told me that he sat there and he kept saying to the receptionist, so is he ready to see me yet? Well, he's busy. So finally he said, the heck with it. He got up, walked in right past the receptionist, opened up the door and said, I'm talking to you now. And he pounded on this table. And he said, this is what we're gonna do, you know? And if you don't like it, we won't bring you any patients. You won't get any patients from us. We'll bring them to the hospital, so good. But eventually he got all the young physicians. And that's what really sold the program in the hospital.
In the beginning, all there was Dr. Wesney, the medical program, George Johnson,
Yeah.
who was his connection in the state, and getting the things going, and the 6 colony ambulances, and 4 or 5 doctors over at Latham Medical Group, who during the day had a console with a radio so they could talk to us on the HEAR system, and at night were patched in by colony dispatch to us from their beds from home,
Yep.
on their telephone,
Out by the pool.
or out by the pool, or wherever they were. And that's how the system was. And then we were dumping patients in the area hospitals with IVs and medicine in them that had been authorized, that had been pushed by these AEMT paramedics from the town of Colony, that had been, the orders had been given by physicians in their pajamas at home in the middle of the night, and poor unsuspecting ER nurses and docs, many of whom at that time were not board certified in emergency medicine. There wasn't even an emergency medicine residency in Albany Med at that time yet. It hadn't even been, their residency program hadn't been established yet. And we were coming in Cadillac ambulances. There was maybe one that was a box, not even a box. So we were coming in these old caddies, and it was strange. And there were people that were not very happy with what we were doing at all. And they weren't happy at us. But Doc was really tough because he was a real salesman. And he didn't lose a lot of arguments. He lost some, but he usually came back and won them later.
Yep. And the other thing that people don't realize, that some of the things that he really pushed in this area, you know, besides ambulance, getting rid of ambulance drivers and getting paramedics, is there wouldn't have been a regional trauma center as early as there was in the REMO area. REMO was first designated regional trauma center that I know of that was designated by the federal government, because the state wouldn't designate the regional trauma center. And then when they got around to it, they sort of just slipped through it and tried to make everybody a regional trauma center, and then realized that didn't work either. But that was amazing. And again, the helicopter system. He said, we can get them to the hospital quicker. Why can't we have a helicopter? Why can't we bring them in that way? And he pushed Politis on that one, something terrible to get that one. John and I were going visiting everybody we could, the trauma center at that point, and the helicopter people, the state police department, they're trying to get the helicopter system going. Time after time when we went there, finally got that going. And they were, they were major improvements over and above getting the whole system operating. But there just wouldn't have been a system if there wasn't a guy like him around.
And I think that's part of the amazing stuff if you think about it. Even thinking about back when you took an exam, it's not like they went to a textbook publisher and found an exam. They had to create the curriculum, create the exam,
And as Andy said, you know, and then convince the state health department that not only what we were doing was legitimate, but they had to essentially embrace it and let us fly with it. I mean, I don't know at what point a state exam existed. I know I didn't take one.
As you remember, our first credentialing was actually AMT 9s. We weren't
Yeah.
paramedics per se, we were level 9s, whatever the heck that meant. I
Yeah.
think we caught the state off guard.
Yeah,
They
Dr.
didn't
Bob
know what
didn't
to
know
tell
what to
us.
call us, so he called us.
Exactly.
So there was a bridge course for the next 4 years to get us up to what the state finally recognized as a paramedical.
The other thing is, Earl, you'll remember this about his perseverance, this will not fail attitude. And REMO was on the precipice, if that's the appropriate word, a number of times of financially going down. And he made a great speech once about why can't they just fill up a peach basket and send us money downtown? One of his great speeches, I still remember it. I was working in the state office then, I was in the administrative unit, and he managed to get special legislation passed, right, which only Doc could do. This was very REMO-specific legislation. And you were very close to going down, you needed that money, and I was dispatched over to hand deliver the checks. And I passed by the farmer's market en route to the state controller's office, and I bought a little peach basket. And I remember
that.
walking into Remo and handing it to Earl and said, "Here, we just filled up your peach basket for Dr. Wesney."
There was a time when part of the new paramedics training was sample signals, I guess is the best way to describe it, where you interacted with the doc to just prove that you could actually talk about the patient that was before you. And I can remember Wesney telling a story where he was the physician, and he thought they were doing this educational scenario. And he was back and forth with, you know, this is what I have, okay, try this. And then they, you know, give it a few minutes, and the instructor that was with the paramedic student would say, okay, well, this is what's occurred. Now relay that back to the doc. And Wesney said that it was actually a diabetic relay, or not a diabetic, but an allergic reaction that progressed to the point where they had no IV access. The patient was in terrible shape. And Doc ordered an intracardiac injection because he said, well, they're really pushing me here. They must be pushing a student on the other end. And at the end of the scenario, Doc found out that they had actually been treating a real patient in anaphylaxis, and he ordered an intracardiac epi injection. Does that ring a bell with you guys?
Could have been, I don't remember. I remember doing enough intercardiac.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It was part of it.
That's the way
Yeah.
he did it. I mean, he did it.
I remember doing a lot
He
of them.
would call them into the different docs and do them.
Which is pretty profound if you think about that.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, imagine explaining that to the hospital staff, that not only were they going to teach us all about this funny thing called an IV, but we were actually going to do intracardiacs. And probably everybody sitting here had done one or several at the point in your career.
Many.
Yeah, they didn't phase them out. They weren't phased out until what, into the 80s?
Yeah, somewhere in there.
Because when we put the guys online in the city of Troy, which was 81, 82, I can't remember the exact date we went online with them. We were still doing intercardiacs. But I think they phased out in the early 80s.
Yeah, because
Stopped doing them.
we used to go to the gross anatomy.
Right.
You remember that? You had to go through the gross anatomy lab to learn intracardiac injections. And
Yeah,
did
all
that
the way
for
back.
a long time.
Well, yeah, that's when we really had Remo, and when you were running the program. But in the early days, from Doc, we didn't learn anything. We learned it from a CPR Annie and putting the needle where we thought to do it in the chest. We didn't have any labs in the early days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can remember that going online, and you know, the practical aspect of paramedicine really didn't exist. I mean, we started, and we were actually, you know, every day there would be another story when you came in to, you know, who got to actually do this the first time to a real person, because it, you know, it just didn't exist prior to that.
he's a general practitioner.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Because the concept, he isn't like the great, the kids we get today and the docs we get today, who are they all are board certified in
Residency
emergency
trained.
medicine.
Yeah.
They're residency trained and board certified in emergency medicine. I mean, they know they learn the philosophy early. They learn it early and they know it early.
Yeah.
He was a general
Family practice
practitioner,
job,
family
yeah.
practice, general practitioner, who was not an emergency medicine guy, who was just this crazy driving force before we got the Greer Pomeroys and the Nick Nierbauers and the other great ER docs that we've gotten over the years. We've been lucky to get in this region and everywhere else, and up to the Mike Daly's today and people like that. Yeah. Or the guy, the people in Troy that I had, Dr. Athanasia, and Dr. Retired as the director of the ER at Samaritan,
Jack?
Jack Brayton, and of course at St. Mary's.
Yeah.
Yes.
Jay
Yeah.
Thalia.
One and
Kay
only.
Thalia,
Yeah.
Dr. Thalia,
Yeah, Cunningham, right?
Yes.
at Cunningham, and then up at and of course at Leonard. My God, it was.
Well, Zana Coach.
Zana
With Zana Coates,
yeah.
the nurse, she kept the docs in line.
But,
Yeah.
yeah, but all those people believed in Wes. They really believed in him. He sold them on the whole program.
Yeah, he had them. He had them in his pocket. Yeah.
And
I mean-
once they were convinced, they convinced everybody in their hospital.
Because you have to go back to 1967. Was 67 the white paper?
White paper.
The white
Yeah.
paper 67. I should know. I got a printed copy of it at home. The famous original white copy that said, just paraphrasing, that said you're better off being hit in Vietnam
Yep.
than you were being picked up by any ambulance on any highway in the United States
Right.
and being trained. And that created the DOT program and created the EMT curriculum. And then from there became the EMT paramedic. So it goes back to that. And so what was happening here in 73 and 74, 73 when Doc was pushing, 74 when he got the training going, when he convinced George and got the training program, and we started it at Shaker. What happened here was no different than what was happening in all those other parts of the country in the early 70s. You gotta remember, on TV, emergency had just come on TV a couple years before we started here. This program about this California program and the LA program.
That's how Jim Page got
And yeah, that's where
Jim Page,
Jimmy
yeah.
Page was the technical director. He was a retired, but he had retired not retired, but he had left being a battalion chief in LA. Was a technical director for emergency, and then ended up in the Buffalo program, the North Carolina program, and all those EMS programs he was involved in before he created GEMS and started his magazine and the other stuff that he
Well,
did.
he was a Westney
Oh, Wes had him in his
person,
back
too.
pocket.
Yeah, he was a
Yeah,
Westney believer.
Yeah.
All the way.
Well, and it went the other way.
Yeah,
I guess they're both passed on, so I can tell the story. But Jim Page swore me to secrecy. We had dinner one night in Florida, and he said, "How's my friend Howard Wesney?" He says, "I want to tell you a story."
the money.
Yep. And what happened
So
was
it's
the
secrecy.
the paramedic. Well, back then it was. He actually told it at Albany Med that night, I believe, when he came up to do tribute to Doc. But he and Doc were together, and he said that his magazine, which had a different name than GEMS at the time, I think it was the Paramedic Forum or something.
Yeah,
like
something when
that.
he first
Yeah.
started, yeah.
Right, and he ended up, he said, "I don't have enough money for the press run." This is Jim Page talking to Howard. Howard said, "I'll help you out." He gave him $10,000 without a thought, because it was for pre-hospital emergency care. Doc believed in it at every turn with a passion, and he handed him, without, just because he believed in him, on a handshake, there was no paperwork or contracts, $10,000. And it was that press run that really pushed off, and GEMS was created, which is now distributed, I believe, to well over 50 countries, and has impacted on people all over the universe, not just the United States, because of the information that is in there. Anyway, years later, when GEMS was doing very well, Jim Page came back to him and said, "Here's your money, but if you'd like, I'll give you shares or I'll pay you interest. And Doc says, no, you were doing it for pre-hospital emergency care. Just give me the $10,000 back. I'll be happy. And he did. And if he had gone for the shares, Jim sold GEMS for probably well into the 7 digits many years later to Elsevier. And Doc, it didn't even bat an eye with Doc. It was just, I did something that was important for pre-hospital care, and that's what I wanted to do. And Jim Paige never forgot what he did. And when they did a tribute at Albany Med to Howard Westney many years ago, Jim flew in because he wanted to thank him. That story had gone very public.
I remember that.
Everybody had gone public at that point. But it is amazing to speak with that kind of passion very quietly. Doc never told anybody that story. It was when Jim related out that everybody realized that that quiet, humble man had done what he had done.
Oh, I know what it was. Maureen Glasheen. She was from
Oh,
the
Blue
second.
Queen.
Yeah, she was from the Secretary of State's office.
Oh, she was counsel.
Yeah, and she said, I was told to call you by the Secretary of State because she said this bad man just came into my office, or his office, and was pounding, pounding on the table. You gotta get this going. You gotta get this going. We gotta have better pre-hospital care, and the hospitals have to be better, because he's always trying to improve the hospitals too, which they didn't like too much at that point. So she said, the only thing the Secretary of State could get out of it was, if you don't know what I'm talking about, here's a card. Call this guy. He'll tell you what
One
I'm
of the things
talking
that
about.
Earl did magnificently, which if in fact he hadn't had it, it would have been a real problem, because this was not Doc's strength. It was the 1200 series grants came out. There was a lot of grant writing. There was a lot of devil in the details stuff
Oh, yeah.
that Earl delivered for him that just was not Doc's forte.
Yeah.
Doc was, get me in front of a group, get me in front of my physicians. Let me tell you the theory. The practical guy who actually had to do the nuts and bolts work, that's where Earl complimented him and brought all those things home. And that was essential, because it wouldn't have happened without that.
Well, he got a consultant. He paid for the consultant to come in when we got the first federal grant. And he wrote a lot of it, and I sort of like went through it and checked it and edited it so it made some sense in some cases. But I mean, he had the ideas. And all those writing about what is REMO and everything, he wrote all that up. I mean, I had to edit quite a bit of it, but he wrote it all up. I noticed it's still in the REMO, what is REMO thing. But he thought all that up. There's no question about it, or wrote it up anyway, or had the ideas and said, okay, do it. Let's get that show on the road. That's all I ever remember. If I never remember anything about Wes, it'll be, let's get the show on the road. That's the only thing. I remember the mask pants,
I was the first person to put mask pants on in this region.
upside down.
Because I
Yeah.
trusted Billy Schmidt. I jumped a call for a shooting, a self-inflicted gunshot wound on Central Avenue in Midway Fire District, and I was up in the area, and I said, I'll go on the ambulance with you, and I ended up the only medic on it, and I had those guys help me. It was Charlie Rapazzo, who wasn't a medic at the time, and I said, put the mask pants on for me real quick. And they put them on upside down. I wonder why they had problems pulling up. The tubes were underneath his ass and underneath his thigh. But I got them to work. I said, we're not going to take them off. And I got them into Albany Med. They had, even though Greer and everybody knew about them, she wasn't there, they promised us. And those poor guys at Albany Med just didn't know what to do with them. Had no idea what to do with them. I think they called, I think John was in the building, Fortune was in the building, and Fortune came
No, it
down.
was Sam Powers.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow, that blasted the past.
Yeah, who originated these trauma centers, really.
The sequel is Ronnie liked the pants so much he wore them to our installation back with that year.
Yeah.
It just, other parts of the state, when they started to use masks, nobody knew what they were. They were cutting them off. And Dr. Huzzer I remember, because I had to get all the material together, had to send out a statewide mailing to all the hospitals saying, do not cut these off, because all these rural squads were buying them, were having bake sales and stuff, and all of a sudden they're out $800 or $1,000, whatever they cost, and had to go out a new fundraiser to replace because some doc had taken a pair of scissors and gone right
Oh,
up
yeah,
them.
they cut them off in hospitals here in our region. They were cut up in our region.
I can remember once going in with bad mask pants, and a resident took them off, and Greer was working, and he and she went to the coffee room. And I worked with Greer, so I know what happened.
It was always amazing that hospitals would want to cut them up, and it made me feel good because I felt better than the rest of them because I knew they had Velcro. You didn't need to cut them. They were Velcro. But with all this great hospital staff who were chewing your butts out and didn't like what you were doing and weren't smart enough to figure out how Velcro worked. You know.
Zippers before Velcro.
Yeah.
Oh, zippers too.
that's
We
right.
did have zippers
That's
too.
right.
We did have some with zippers. You're right. Yeah, we had zipper and Velcro ones. You're good. You're good.
Remember,
You're good.
we had the gauges on them, and then somebody said, why the gauges? We really need the patient's blood pressure. And then they said, let's take the gauges off. I mean, we have actually gone through an evolution of a piece of EMS equipment that was a staple always done to being used under just specific conditions, and our applications changed over the years. We've all watched that happen,
Yes.
and that was, part of
Because
it.
they didn't work in Houston.
But I think what Ron is saying is why we did that, because as Ron said, he wanted to be a pioneer, because that's the way West taught him, be a pioneer. And so we all got that ingrained into us, We want to be pioneers, we want to do it. We want to be the first ones to do it.
And that's something you don't think about either until you look back retrospectively, is to instill that level of confidence in people who were doing something that essentially had never been done before, and you really didn't even have a practical setting to practice it on. You had to go kind of with the military mentality in that you were gonna, it's correct, and you're gonna do it because it's got to be done, and you're gonna go out there and do it right. And
We were gonna get these when they were in the spring of '75. Paul's gone. It's too bad because he would remember. He probably remember the date. In the spring of '75, when we were getting equipment together, and we were gonna get a Life Pack 4s because Seattle, Washington had these big. Everybody remembers the Life Pack 4 was a monster. It was big. If you remember, I think they might have had some Life Pack 4s in the early days of emergency too, along with their big orange box. We were going to get these Life Pack 4s, and then Physio Control came out with this neat new prototype, and I don't remember how we got them, but somehow the order for Life Pack 4s between
Wes got 'em.
Wes and we ended up with this prototype of this lightweight defibrillator monitor
Came apart.
from Physio Control, which totally revolutionized the industry. Just totally changed the use of these devices. And we
sure-
were the first ones to get it, we were the first ones to use it in the little old town of Colony program, 1975.
I'm sure we got it because West had so many arguments with the Physio Control at that point, that they would give them anything, just to
Get out of here.
Yeah, doesn't.
So we
don't come
got
back.
the
Yeah.
green scope, Life Pack 5s. This great little machine, which was a godsend in those days.
Yeah, that was.
It's, nothing like
You
the Life
couldn't
Pack
destroy
12s and
'em
15s
until-
today.
They were tough.
Yeah, until Ray Hughes drove over one with the rescue truck.
And didn't believe in what we were doing. But in the end, I can sit back today at 70 years of age and just smile and say, we won.
Yeah.
We won. We really won. We won. We were right, and we were going in the right direction. We were doing the right
What we're
thing.
saying is that, he was the impetus behind all of this, no matter what. He was the pioneer, and he was the father of EMS, as far as I'm concerned, in New York State, at least, because these people listened to what he was saying, and we were allowed to get these programs over, and a lot of the regional EMS programs in New York State were all based on the way REMO did things, technically. Because I attended meetings with them, you know, and they listened to what we were saying, and it all came from Dr. Wesney. Whatever he was, there was no question, he was the pioneer, and everybody tried to follow what he did in New York State, as far as I'm concerned, you know? And like Ron says, maybe someday we'd get there, but it would have taken us a long time, and he got things going very quickly in the way he did it. And we believed him, and everybody believed him. So that's about what I have to say.